Ooh, greetings. So for today's reading, we're on page 224, and we, in the Parinama method here, bloop, this is actually a fresh one. This one isn't the one I read out of. And ooh, it feels good. Okay. So we are like here. I'm going to just show you. This is what we have left. Okay, so we're going to read from 224, Shuffling Papers, about dreams. And yesterday I talked a lot about dreams, and possibly better. We'll see. This might be either an upgrade or sort of a kind of like unremarkable part two of like to the notion of dreams. I talked a lot about dreams. And this morning, when I was thinking about reading this, I was thinking about so we're going to talk about like what I'm about to say will become increasingly clear once I start reading. Let's see if we can get that there. But I was thinking this morning about how there is like an element that isn't like overly present in the book, but is kind of an aspect of it, which is the practicality of it. And so one of the things is, certainly in the ascension point of the hubs, it's kind of making a case for the practicality of these notions in each of the hubs in terms of how they impact a practical life. And one of the things, and maybe to talk a little bit more to dreams. So some of the practical part of the application of using dreams in this process and what it means, I may allude to it here. In the rite of passage, I spoke kind of extensively about it. But one of the things that in this process with doing this, and so the conscious reclamation, which is as we read through, what the learning what the hub is and understanding the interruptions and stressors and knowing the adaptations and holding patterns, and then like working into the expansion and the dynamism within each facet of ourselves, is that there's an aspect of it that can be really passive in terms of there's a word that I'm looking for that's not coming, which is like has to do with contemplation of it, is that the contemplation, especially if there's receptivity. Let me think. Yeah. If anything, I feel like I don't think this is done consciously. There's more of like a gating of this that needs to be sort of opened in order to allow this in. What I mean by that is like blocking out the dreaming. And so one of the things I was referencing yesterday when I was talking about how to like prepare and create the fertile ground for dreaming is that alcohol will block it, weed blocks it, TV, and even like if you're like listening to stuff while you're sleeping because it helps you go to sleep, like that will block it. And just as a sort of a recap here is that this section on dreams is this very practical, and this was okay. Maybe I just figured out how to talk about this. Okay, So when I wrote the book, my headspace in this was like, okay, talking about dreams is like sort of the same as talking about like intuition as being this like, sort of mystical thing, which, with no discernment, you're supposed to follow it and not, like, and like, what is it? And should you trust it? Should you not trust it? And, kind of nailing it down, like, this is pattern recognition. And also, it benefits from some cognitive oversight. And so with dreams, it was kind of the same thing. And the thing was that was like, okay, how do I make the case for them to respect them? And I think I see that in this section, which is like there's still very much this like a that's in it. And I think the thing that or I know the thing that I'm adding in here is how dreams relate to the process of doing this for your own evolution and your own actualization and your own this own like the own loosening of the tangle. So the dreams, yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna shift, get a little more comfortable here. So let me think for a second here. Yeah, so and so yeah, yeah, that's it. And so the discussion on dreams here is, like we'll see. I'm gonna read it. I actually haven't read it. I just know the headers because we have like dreams and then technology, science and math, music and literature. And I know the case that is about to be made. I don't know what will be in the interstices. I don't remember. It's been a minute. But I'm going to read through it and then talk to what arises with it. So just as a reminder, the last reading was a lot more went in the beginning of it went a lot more in depth into dreams and like actually like actively using dreams, especially for this what we're doing here with Parinama, which is what we're willing to see in the opening this up. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. I feel a little gated today. There's this thing that sometimes happens where it's like I feel like there's sort of a tighter ring in terms of almost the sense of what I should talk about. So, all right, so dreams, let's talk about it. So, all progress. Okay. All progress comes from inspiration, and there's no richer, more surreal, or more creative world we occupy than the one of our dreams. And many ideas that have shaped our modern world come from them. Everyone dreams, but their recall, frequency, and even whether they're in color differs from person to person. An astonishing paradox is that many discoveries that drive us towards so-called logical thinking first emerged in the liminal space of dreams. So in The Wizard of Oz, it's after Dorothy's dream of her trip to Oz that she awakens with a newfound perspective. Gonna like the pause on that is actually that, I referenced The Wizard of Oz before. There's so the idea that that is actually was actually a dream, it would actually point more to the other part of dreaming as it relates to part this like methodology, which is that there's like processing and work that happens passively as we sleep. And I don't know. And so, like, something I think is, like, not uncommon is that, you go on vacation and all of a sudden there's more kind of like space and there's more dreaming, or you end a relationship or a job or, something that had sort of like in a sort of a survival maintenance mode. And then as soon as there's a little space for there's to be an opening, that dreams start to communicate information or even like a slight amount of receptivity. So for Google, from Google to E equals MC squared, the practices and tools of modern science and its discovery, such as the periodic table, medicinal insulin, the shape of DNA, and the theory of evolution by natural selection are just a few examples of ideas that came from dreams. So even literary themes like human duality in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the plot for Frankenstein, or also called The Modern Prometheus, which is kind of funny, a little throwback, but whatever, was initially conceived in dreams. So math prodigy Srinivasa Ramanujan explained how he discovered the infinity of pi. He said, while asleep, I had an unusual experience. There was a red screen formed by flowing blood, as it were. I was observing it. Suddenly, a hand began to write on the screen. I became all attention. That hand wrote several elliptical integrals. They stuck to my mind. As soon as I woke up, I committed them to writing. Ramanujan, it's Ramanujan made use of after sleep notation, and according to mathematician G.H. Hardy, relied on a mingled argument. Wait, sorry, I'm gonna have to sleep back in here. Oh my God. Okay, so I'm gonna try that again. Ramanujan. Yeah, okay. Ramanujan made use of after sleep notation, and according to mathematician G.H. Hardy, relied on a mingled argument, intuition, and induction for the many math solutions he would produce throughout his short life. Following are more examples of dream-inspired work in technology, science, and popular art that have shaped our shared reality. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to write more about him in this, because it's like okay, yep, so I don't need to talk about it just yet. Yeah, this isn't so bad. This is actually like kind of coming through a little bit more than originally teed up. So technology. The idea for Google began as an anxiety dream about a clerical error. In 1996, Larry Page had an irrational fear that he'd been admitted to university, Stanford, because of an error, and so believed he'd be kicked out at any moment when the mistake was discovered. That anxiety fueled a dream Page had about downloading and storing the entire internet on individual personal computers. When he woke up, he was curious to see if it was possible, so he did the math. Given the amount of data, it wasn't. It certainly wouldn't be, imagine it's 1996. But he figured he could save all the data as individual links. That gave him the idea of creating a searchable database of links to what are now web pages, leading to Google's creation. Yeah. I feel like I'm reading this garbled. Like I'm hearing it. I don't know. It sounds like when I'm saying it, it's like blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's see if I can tighten this one up here for science and math. So, and let's see if I learned how to say Ramanujan. We did it. So Ramanujan reported that throughout his life, he repeatedly dreamed of a Hindu goddess known as Namakal. She presented him with complex mathematical formulas, which he could then test and verify upon waking. One example was the infinite series for pi, cited above. Ramanujan produced almost 4,000 proofs, identities, conjectures, and equations in pure mathematics in his 33-year lifetime. The richness of his ideas and conjectures in fields like elliptic function and number theory was ahead of its time and almost all correct, and continues to inspire and direct mathematical research now. I think one of the reasons that I wanted to actually, I actually think this will be self-evident, so I'm not gonna speak to it. So, but part of it is the imagery, it's interesting to me, like, so Ramanujan, the way he describes it is he's, like, looking at a red screen that's flowing blood, and that this hand begins to write on the screen, and this is, like, certainly before screens were what we consider to be screens, but, um, now. But just I think one of the things about dreams, and part of why I think I wanted to position this as making a case for the practical, like, notion of what they are, is also pointing to, like, our level of discomfort with, like, absurd or disturbing or expansive notions, and that for the sixth, so as we're discussing in the sixth hub, that as soon as we come very, like, limited in terms of what we believe are possible, and what we like, are, like, in the tangle, like, this whole thing about, like, beliefs forming reality, and that we're kind of loosening that, grasp. That part of this is that, like, how this comes through is there needs to be some receptivity to being able to see things that are disturbing, or yeah, I'm gonna call it disturbing. I'm gonna use disturbing because it's disturbing in terms of, like, stirring up. Not just like the, like, revolting kind of notion, like disturbing. It's just like things are stirring up, like, settled notions. That's the disturbing. There it is. Okay, Einstein's conception of the speed of light came from a dream in which he was sledding down a steep mountainside, going so fast that eventually he approached the speed of light. At this moment, the stars in his dream changed their appearance in relation to him. He awoke and ruminated on this idea, soon formulating that what would become one of the most famous scientific theories in history, the theory of relativity, also came to him in a dream, one about cows. He dreamed he was walking through a farm when he came upon some cows by an electric fence. He then saw the cows jump at the same time as the fence gave them the electric shock, but a farmer who was standing at the other end of the field saw them jump one by one, like a Mexican wave. So Einstein realized their views of the same event had been different, which led to the theory of relativity, the idea that events look different depending on where you're standing because of the time it takes light to reach our eyes. So that also points back, and as we're seeing, like, in terms of the circularness of this book, that these are starting to point to chapter 3 and part 1, and so there's that. So James Watson and his colleagues discovered the shape of DNA. In one account, Watson had a dream of a double-sided staircase, and in another, he dreamed of two snakes coiled around each other with their heads at opposite ends. Niels Bohr discovered the structure of the atom by dreaming of horses on a racetrack. Bohr was later awarded a Nobel Prize in physics due to this leap in creative thinking. Frederick Banting dreamt about a diabetic dog, which led to a breakthrough relating to the understanding of the disproportionate balance between sugar and insulin for a diabetic. And this led to another dream indicating how insulin could be used to treat diabetes. Dmitry Mendeleev dreamt of the organizing principle of the periodic table of elements after he spent many waking hours struggling with how to organize atomic matter. So as you get, like, not accidentally, I emphasize science and math, as far as the, like, where the impact that dreams have had, because it's not too hard to imagine that it's like them really pointing to this notion of, like, a rational world, like the structured rational world, that it's actually inspired by this space of inspiration that is, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of other examples too. This is just kind of I cherry picked these for that very specific reason that it was like making the case for dreams as they link to practical reality, not so much, yeah. I mean, so for music and literature, Mary Shelley had the idea for Frankenstein, which many consider to be the first sci-fi novel. So that's like, yeah. After having a vivid nightmare, Robert Louis Stevenson described the inspiration for the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's premise as a man who could hide in plain sight with his two distinct personalities. And quote, he said, "For 2 days, I went about racking my brains for a plot of any sort. And on the second night, I dreamed the scene at the window and a scene afterwards split in two in which Hyde pursued for some crime, took the powder and under what is my problem with reading today? Is there a section in this on reading comprehension? Or like, I feel like, remember like when you used to be called upon to read in class and some days you just had the flow? You'd just be like boopity boopity. And some days it was like today's a day. Um, so I'm going to reread this. Let's see if take two actually offers up a cleaner a cleaner throughput. So, okay, so this is the author of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So for 2 days, I went about racking my brains for a plot of any sort. And on the second night, I dreamed the scene at the window and a scene afterwards split in two, in which Hyde, pursued for some crime, took the powder and underwent the change in the presence of his pursuers. I guess probably one of the other things I want to point out is that these notions that are conceived of in dreams, there's a lot of like wakeful replication gets kind of dubbed as innovation. I mean, like one of the first things that comes to mind is like say for example like a rideshare app, it's a terrible example, but just the fact that it's like, look, there's one idea and then there's kind of like the me too function. This is like in everything, and certainly in like business, huge is totally, this like me too thing where it's like second to market, third to market. And then that there's all these sort of like downstream iterations of an inspired notion. And you look at these notions and you realize like that idea like changed, the idea that someone could actually sort of inhabit like two distinct identities, or even Frankenstein, like it's still used as an analogy. Obviously the thing, where you get nerds who are like, it's Frankenstein's Dr. Frankenstein was the doctor and Frankenstein's monster is who we typically think is Frankenstein. Like that nerd correction. It's a nerd correction. But like, anyway, nerd correction notwithstanding, that Dr. Frankenstein's monster is still like, it's still like a metaphor for just being like cobbling something together out of like, in all sorts of ways. So it's interesting that these are all like sort of initial points of contact that entire worlds like sort of proliferate out of in the waking sense. So, and according to Paul McCartney, the melody for Yesterday came to him fully formed in a dream. And when he woke up, he found what key it was in and played it in full, but it sounded so familiar that he worried he was copying someone else's work. He played it for friends and family and asked them if they'd ever heard it before, which of course they had not. So what's my point? What's my point? My point is that it's like okay, so I remember I have a memory of being at like executive events, which sounds like absurd to talk about, but and talking with, for like venture capital stuff and talking with like CEOs and who are like, I want to start my own thing, but I don't have any ideas. It's a huge thing where it's like, I don't have ideas. I don't have ideas. Like, if I had ideas, if I knew what my purpose was, if I like, and so without the sense of feeling like this is something that you could access internally, there's it turn you know, depending on like how strong the like sort of hunger for that, it becomes really externalized. So it's like asking other people. It's like looking for it out in the world, which is like kind of like traveling in the wrong direction in some ways. Not like, I mean, it's also collecting information, but the thing is everyone dreams. It's just it really is about how much access you're willing to give yourself to that. And it's like back to the pointing, to the like kind of the comfort with the distortion and the disruption of dream state is just that like like opening up receptivity to it. And and that's a lot of, and that also points to why we build up for a second, third, fourth hub, like that we're building up to get here, that we have this solid foundation. But this is so part of why, at least to me, like I think I remember putting a lot of like work into this, was that it's kind of like one of the answers to a really common question is related to finding things in dreams and finding answers about ourselves. And this is how, and allowing in our dream states to be processing a lot of what's coming up in the conscious reclamation of this. And even there's almost like a rebooting that happens. So if you're, depending on how much exposure you have to, or how much processing you've done in with TPM, one of the things you probably notice is it makes you tired because there's like a rebooting function happening, and you start to really understand why you're like shifting your perception of the world. Because back to the tangle, when we're talking about the tangle, which is our early experiences and circumstances shaped reflexes in each of the hubs, and then we create beliefs to rationalize what those reflexes are, and that forms what we consider reality. And then that reality gets projected out into the world, and then the world just responds accordingly and projects it back on us, which reinforces the tangle and just tightens it a little, just a little bit more every single time. And so what we're doing here is realizing the malleability of this. And I would say that in that, what we're really looking at is like the belief part of this, which is that this is where that has a like a tremendous opportunity to be shown for being something that can be shifted. this that yeah that the perception, the enjoyment, and the experience of life, if you're not, if you're unhappy with it, or if life feels heavy, um or misaligned or out of integrity, or sad in a way that feels like unresolvable, um that that is not like a fixed reality. And I don't want to get into this, like, it's like I saw something that was like, it's your fault. It's your fault. You choose your, like the whole thing of like you're choosing your reality thing. I take objection to, because when we're talking about the reflexes that are informing the beliefs, these reflexes were formed before we were we had episodic memory before we had context. I mean, we're talking about like the early development of the nervous system, shaping like the actual sort of like movement and the like function, capacity, dynamism, shape of our nervous system, and that our belief systems are basically at like adapting to make sense of those reflexes to kind of like ground ourselves in the world. So the idea that's like, it's like, oh, there's a lot of that. It's like you can choose to da 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 da. And I just like there's already an issue with that because it's pointing to shaming. It's pointing to separation. It's pointing to a notion that you'd be making bad decisions for yourself. It's like, well, why are you making a bad decision for yourself? And it's like there's a it's like kind of there's a truth in it, but it's just directionally inaccurate. It's like approaching it like telling it backwards. And it's like, no, like the forward, it always starts with the positive intent of understanding that it's like you did what you could with the circumstances and the experiences of your life with what you could, which a lot of which is also including the development of your nervous system, what actual tools you had. It's like you can't build a house with a screwdriver and a hammer, but if you have a screwdriver and a hammer and you're kind of like figure out how to make you make something work, that and it's like, and then it's like, why do you just have a shack, or whatever? It's like, um, why do you just, there's like probably a better word for that, but I'm not like coming up with it. But yeah. Yeah. So there is like, so as far as like the reevaluation of, and like the loosening of the tangle is that we spend time in these facets and in this exploration and as far as belief systems are concerned, that being able to see things, so being able to tolerate strangeness, like the strangeness of dreams, um like foreign visual notions and feelings, being able to tolerate them, because like the thing about like like being like really continuing to just look for what we know how to see is this kind of this connection between like the kind of absurd visual of dreams and the feelings that arise with it, to increase tolerance and acceptance for that, to be able to grow possibility. Like it's part of, it's sort of a passive way. And one of the things I want to say also about dreams is that, um and this is like, I don't know if this is like, I don't want to say this is like something that's like necessarily directive, but also just pointing to, so it's so tempting, like when you wake up from a dream and it's sort of like floating away, to try, have a very particular way of trying to land it, which is just to make sense of it. And what I would encourage, and maybe you already do this, is to actually just keep looking at it without trying to make sense of it, trying to decode it. Is just keep looking at, like, kind of considering the dream and even seeing if more comes forward in the thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, look, so once again, pointing back to the last reading had a lot more of like I think I talked a bit more about some of the practical stuff. It's not too complex, but there is what it is. But I actually, I came into this saying that I thought this was going to be really kind of like a little too, like, I don't know, like kind of like conventional thinking or whatever. And I actually stand by it now. So I'd be the first to say, like, yeah, I think we've evolved past that. But there really is something here about And I do like I will say I do like that there's an emphasis on technology, science, and math, and even music and literature in a very particular way. Um, I mean, just that the ideas that have like, are shaping our current sort of physical reality were conceived in dreams. I think that's probably, like, the biggest point that I was trying to make was that it was that. And so it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, it's like, okay, so that's just a nice notion. Well, like, bring it in and start to cultivate your own capacity for inspiration and your own capacity for seeing. And I'll say that on the side of, like, the ideas part of, like, there's that's great. There's also something to be said for just the readiness for what you can see, and understanding that if you are blocking the dreaming capacity by, like, either drinking, like weed, watching a lot of TV, like, having a lot of stimulation, having trouble sleeping, whatever, there's, like, a practicalness to that that actually has to do with, I will say, and just in full disclosure, is that a lot of the revelation that comes through, you need space for it. So it really isn't like, just it's like just it's like you're going to need space for it. So if you're getting up and you have, like, a lot of anxiety and a job and duties and things that, like, really fill up your day, like, adding in sort of haunting feelings to that is like the haunting feelings and, like, slight notions that you really don't have the space to process is like, it's like, do you really there's there's, like, an intelligence to blocking some of this stuff out, which is like, I don't have the inconvenience, or the, like, being like, I don't really honestly have the place for this. And and with that being said, it's like making decisions about, do you wanna cultivate the space for that? There's a lot of fear of, like, not doing things, in this culture, there's a lot of, like, the merit of busyness, like, where it's like, "I'm so busy." It's like, "Well, what time can you do this?" Like, "Well, okay, in 2 weeks, I have a slot at 2 o'clock on Thursday." And that has this sort of, like, there's, like, sort of a unspoken validation of having that level of, like, not availability, that busyness, being in demand, having a lot of stuff to do. And, I mean, it's a thing. I don't even it's not even honestly, it's like, it's not even up for discussion really, it is a thing. And how uncomfortable, even the disdain for people, like, don't work, it's like, oh, how could you? And the thing that is, like, to actually exist in open space, that there's, some, if it's not investigated, that there'd be shame around that. So, people wonder, like, well, what would I do if I had time? It's like this kind of shit. And, as much as it's like, so to do a full circle where it's like, well, what would you do? It's like, well, you do this kind of shit and you'd have time for, and it's like, well, who has time for this? It's like, well, the people who invented the framework in the world you're living in had the time for it. I mean, it's like the thing where it's like, well, my functionalness is like highly, it's like, no, this is the shot. This is the thing that aches in you, is the sense that you have something that in you that can access these higher levels of inspiration. I mean, it's like, it's just the itchiness that makes people identify with, epic hero stories, is that there's this sense of something greater that can be like achieved, contributed, that's trying to express itself from you. That's why I use the term emblem, is like this unique identity that wants to, sort of, express itself. And that feeling of that, that, and it's kind of like the competing, and I write about this earlier in, I think, part one of the book, and maybe chapter three, I don't know, somewhere in there. It's probably chapter one, I don't know. But the competingness of accessing this component of, like, destiny, and it competes with the kind of like the sort of mundane practical aspects. And it's said that Jesus had two sermons, and one of the sermons was for people who that like everyday people. So it was, he gave a sermon for, the people that worked and paid taxes, and, he spoke to them. And then with his disciples, he had a different sermon that was about these higher principles of, so you had these renunciates who would like, that's the point to what I'm saying is that, these renunciates that had like made the space to be able to contemplate all this because they didn't have job. They just followed Jesus around. I mean, that's not a job. Like that's like I mean, that whole thing. So even in this, in terms of like, like where I feel like everything you have to point out some of the red flags for the places you could potentially be hard on yourself about this, or find like places where shame can like, of course, go, see, you could be doing this better, is just to realize there really is a place for the fact that you like the day-to-day of life of just loving and living and experiencing and doing, and that has a functionality. It's important, and that there's another place, which is a place that has a lot more time and space and energy and like opportunity for rest and recovery for this, and just realizing that I think like it's an important notion that there's different seasons in life for these different states, and to like when you're in the like working planting phase, it's state time whatever, that's a thing. There's no shame in that. There's no shame if you're like not in a time for contemplation, not time for expansion. Just is what it is. But what I'm presenting here is like, okay, well, if you're looking for access to this, that it's like presenting it as something that you could do or not do. So, okay. Yep. We did it. We made it through. Yeah. Without disclosing too much, as this is being read, I've talked about this before, as I'm like going through it myself, and yeah, I mean, it's potent. And it just there's like sort of an infinite unfolding. So, like one of the things that I know when someone tells me, it's like, well, I got that. I sort of, when somebody tells me like, well, I had the final revelation that broke me through, it's like, that tells me a little bit about where somebody is in their, yeah, I don't know, because it's kind of like it's infinite. It's like you just keep breaking through, and it's like that joy of being like, of seeing, of having more clarity, of like opening. It's like, oh my gosh, that's who I really am. It's like, oh my gosh, wow, this is wonderful. Or more access to love, or to feeling, or to shedding a notion about yourself, is just that kind of, it's like, and that there's, the ebb and flow has to do with that there's an opening, and then it's like you don't stay in this like heightened state all the time. Like that's another like sort of sort of fantastical thing, is that you'll still need to integrate. You have this opening, and then you kind of need to rest and integrate, and sometimes it can feel low, which is like sort of can be like a bummer, because it's like, I thought I just had this big breakthrough. The deals aren't deals in this realm. Yeah. So, okay. So for themes. So for the next section, and we're going to be on page 225. Memory is next. And this one's like super functional. Yeah, this is just like an exercise. It's fun though. This one's fun. The next is decision making. Yeah. And then the last theme here is overwhelm, which is too much information. TMI. And then we get into the interruptions and stressors. So, the invalidation of intuition, ideation, and curiosity. Oh, yeah. Bad information, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. So, anyway, that's where we're going. At least the next bend in the road. So, anyway, thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming along. I love it and appreciate it so much. Let's see, what do I have to say in closing? I don't have the words. I actually don't have the words for it. I think like the thing is I just it's kind of like a good feeling. A good feeling directed at you. We did it. All right. So any comments I will respond to. I welcome them. I really enjoy them. And I just want to reemphasize any dissent. Like I don't have, I welcome. I'm interested um in contrary opinions to this if you have them or if there's something I'm missing. I love that. Anything that really sticks with you or like that makes a lot of sense to me. I love hearing that. Like what kind of resonates. Um hopefully I'll make it. But yeah, thank you. Like anything and any likes and interaction with it is really encouraging for me. I like it a lot. I do. Feels nice. So anyway, I will leave you to it for now and I'll see you next time. All right. Until then, bye.